The beginning of a family. James Calloway had never seen himself as a hero. He was just a man trying to make it through each day, one coffee refill at a time, as he ran his small-town diner. Calloway's cafe wasn't much, a few booths lining the walls, the scent of bacon and eggs always lingering in the air, and a chipped counter where regulars came for their daily dose of coffee and small talk. But to James, it was home. For years, the diner had been his entire world. He and his late wife, Lisa, had built it from the ground up, pouring their hearts into every meal served. But when she passed away, James lost more than just his wife. He lost his sense of purpose. The house felt too quiet. The once familiar rhythm of life, early mornings at the diner, evenings with Lisa, was gone, leaving behind a silence that weighed on him like an anchor. At first, he tried to bury himself in work. He would open the cafe before dawn, staying long after closing hours just to avoid going home to an empty house. But no matter how hard he tried, the loneliness crept in. He would find himself staring at the chair Lisa used to sit in, hearing echoes of her laughter and the clinking of dishes. Then, one evening, fate intervened in a way he never expected. James had volunteered at a local shelter a few times before, donating leftover food from his cafe whenever he could. It was there that he first met Malik, Jalen, and Tasha, three siblings who had already endured more pain in their young lives than most adults ever would. Malik, the eldest at 12, was fiercely protective of his siblings. He rarely spoke unless necessary, his sharp eyes always scanning the room as if he expected trouble at any moment. Jalen, 10, was quieter, more reserved, but there was a quiet strength about him. And then there was Tasha, only 7 years old, yet already carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Unlike her brothers, who had learned to keep their emotions guarded, Tasha was unafraid to speak her mind. She would challenge anyone, including James, with a boldness that made him both laugh and admire her. James had always been good with people, customers, employees, strangers who stopped by the diner, but he wasn't prepared for the way these children would get under his skin. He found himself looking forward to seeing them at the shelter, bringing them extra food, listening to their stories, and offering small comforts that, in his mind, didn't amount to much. But to them, it meant the world. One evening, after serving food at the shelter, he overheard a conversation between one of the social workers and another volunteer. "They're running out of options," the woman sighed. "They've been in and out of foster homes, and no one wants to take all three. The system wants to split them up." Something in James's heart clenched. He had spent enough time with the kids to know how deeply they relied on each other. Splitting them up would be the final blow to their already fragile sense of stability. That night, he barely slept. He found himself pacing his kitchen, staring at the empty space around him, and hearing Lisa's voice in his mind. "You always said you wanted a big family." The next day, he walked into the social worker's office and made a decision that would change all of their lives forever. The adoption. The process wasn't easy. As a single man in his 40s, with no prior experience raising children, James faced an uphill battle. The agency questioned whether he could provide a stable home. His small-town community wasn't exactly welcoming to change, and adopting 3 black children, when James himself was white, raised more than a few eyebrows. "You know what you're getting into, right?" one of the caseworkers asked during a home visit. "This isn't just about providing a roof over their heads. These kids have been through trauma. They're going to need more than just food and shelter." James nodded. "I know, and I'm ready." He wasn't sure if that was entirely true, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stand by and watch these kids be separated. When the day finally came and Malik, Jalen, and Tasha officially became Callaways, it was the first time James had felt something other than grief in years. They were hesitant at first, unused to stability, always bracing themselves for the moment they would have to leave again. But James was patient. He learned how to navigate Malik's silent walls, Jalen's quiet fear of being a burden, and Tasha's need to always prove she was strong. The transition wasn't perfect. There were late-night breakdowns, moments of defiance, and days when James wondered if he had made a mistake. But for every difficult moment, there were small victories. Malik finally calling him Dad instead of James, Jalen opening up about his love for drawing, and Tasha falling asleep on his shoulder during movie nights. Slowly but surely, they became a family. The town's reaction. James had never cared much for small-town gossip, but after the adoption, the whispers became impossible to ignore. Did you hear about Calloway? Took in those kids from the shelter. White man raising black kids. That's bound to be trouble. Does he even know what he's doing? At first, James shrugged it off. Let people talk. But the real challenge came when the kids started school. Malik got into fights, unable to ignore the taunts and racist remarks thrown his way. Jalen was bullied, his quiet nature making him an easy target. Tasha, despite her usual confidence, came home in tears one afternoon after a classmate had told her she didn't belong in a white family. James found himself at the school more times than he could count, demanding accountability, pushing for change. He wasn't just their father now. He was their advocate. And if that meant making enemies in a town he had once called home, then so be it. There were moments when he wondered if he was enough, if he could truly prepare them for the world they would face. But every time he questioned himself, he remembered why he had done this in the first place. Because love wasn't about looking the same. It was about showing up, day after day, no matter what. A moment of change. The real turning point came during the town's annual 4th of July parade. It was a big event, where families gathered, businesses decorated their storefronts, and the entire town came together. James had never really participated before, but this year, the kids wanted to go. He wasn't sure how people would react, but he refused to let fear dictate their lives. As they walked down the street, he felt the eyes on them, the stares, the whispered conversations. But then something unexpected happened. A group of older black women who had been sitting on a porch started clapping as they passed. A man who James barely knew gave him a nod of respect. And then one of the local business owners, who had once been one of James's biggest critics, approached him. "I was wrong about you, Calloway," the man admitted. "Takes a lot to do what you did. Those kids are lucky to have you." James didn't say much, just nodded, squeezing Tasha's hand a little tighter. Because in that moment, he realized something. He hadn't just given these kids a home. They had given him one too. And this was only the beginning. Trials and triumphs. James Calloway had always been a man of simple routines. Wake up before dawn, open the diner, serve customers with a steady hand and a quiet nod, and close up long after the last cup of coffee had gone cold. But ever since Malik, Jalen, and Tasha entered his life, his routine had turned into something entirely different, something unpredictable, messy, and at times, overwhelming. Being a father wasn't something James had planned, but as the years passed, he grew into the role. It wasn't easy, though. Raising 3 kids, especially ones who had already endured more than their fair share of hardships, required patience, resilience, and a love deeper than words could express. The struggles of a new life. The first few months were rough. Malik, the eldest, still carried a chip on his shoulder, always on guard, always expecting James to give up on them like so many had before. Jalen was quieter, keeping his emotions bottled up, while Tasha, the youngest, tried to act like she wasn't scared. James had read all the parenting books he could find, but none of them prepared him for the sleepless nights, the sudden breakdowns, or the questions that cut deep. Why did our real parents leave us? Tasha asked one evening as James was tucking her into bed. Her big brown eyes stared at him, searching for an answer he didn't have. James sighed, sitting down on the edge of her bed. Sometimes, people make choices they don't know how to fix. But that doesn't mean they didn't love you. She frowned. Then why didn't they come back? James hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know this. You're home now, and I'm not going anywhere." Tasha stared at him for a moment before nodding, her tiny hand gripping his as she drifted to sleep. Fighting against prejudice. The small town wasn't kind to change. Whispers followed James wherever he went, and not everyone was subtle about their disapproval. Some people refused to eat at his diner anymore. Others made offhanded remarks in the grocery store, loud enough for him to hear. The real challenge, though, was the way the kids were treated. Malik was targeted the most. He had always been a fighter. His past had made him that way. But when other boys at school started taunting him, calling him names, questioning why a white man had taken him in, his anger became harder to control. One afternoon, James got a call from the school. "You need to come down here right away, Mr. Calloway," the principal said, his voice laced with frustration. James arrived to find Malik in the office, his face bruised, his knuckles red. Across from him sat two other boys, one holding a tissue to his bleeding nose, the other looking away, clearly ashamed. "What happened?" James asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Malik clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. One of the boys sneered. "He went crazy. That's what happened." James turned to the principal. "Did anyone see what started this?" The man sighed. According to some witnesses, these boys made inappropriate comments. Malik reacted physically. James looked at Malik. "What did they say?" Malik exhaled sharply, eyes filled with barely contained rage. "They said I didn't belong in your family. That I was some charity case you took in to feel better about yourself." His fists tightened. "They said I should be grateful to even have a roof over my head." James felt something burn in his chest. He turned to the other boys. "And what's your excuse?" Neither of them answered. The principal cleared his throat. "Violence isn't the answer. We can't tolerate fighting." James cut him off. "And what about intolerance? Are you going to punish these boys for what they said?" The principal hesitated. "It's complicated." James clenched his jaw. "No, it's not." He looked at Malik. "Go wait in the car." Malik didn't move at first. Then, with a sharp glare at the other boys, he stormed out. As soon as they got home, James sat across from him at the kitchen table. "You can't go around throwing punches every time someone says something ignorant." Malik scoffed. "So I should just let them say whatever they want?" "No, but there are other ways to fight." Malik leaned back, arms crossed. "Like what?" James took a deep breath. "Like proving them wrong. Like being better, doing better. Not for them, but for yourself." Malik was silent for a long time before finally muttering, "I don't know if I can do that." James smiled. "You already have." Unexpected support. Not everyone in town disapproved of James's decision. Slowly, a few people started showing their support in quiet ways. One afternoon, James was stocking shelves at the diner when an older black woman named Mrs. Johnson walked in. She had lived in town for decades and had seen it all. She sat at the counter, watching James for a while before finally saying, "You did a brave thing, taking in those kids." James wiped his hands on a towel. "I don't know about brave. Just felt like the right thing to do." She nodded. "And you're doing good by them." "I see it." James hesitated before asking, "Do you think they'll ever feel like they belong here?" Mrs. Johnson smiled softly. "Home ain't about where you are. It's about who's waiting for you when you get there." James let those words settle in his heart. The night everything changed. One evening, as James was closing up the diner, the front door burst open. It was Jalen, breathless, his face pale. "Dad, it's Malik. He's in trouble." James didn't need to ask questions. He grabbed his coat and ran. He followed Jalen through the streets, past the school, until they reached an alley behind a gas station. There, he saw Malik, cornered by three older boys, one of whom was the same kid from the school fight. James didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his voice like steel. "Back off." The boys hesitated, then one of them sneered, "This ain't your business, old man." James took another step. "Malik is my business, and I guarantee you, if you don't walk away right now, you'll regret it." There was something in his voice, something fierce and unshakable, that made the boys pause. Then one of them scoffed. "Whatever, man." They left, shoving each other as they disappeared into the night. Malik stood there, fists clenched, breathing heavily. James walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Malik didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he whispered, "They said I'd never be family to you. That no matter how much you say you care, you'd never really see me as your son." James turned him to face him. "Listen to me, Malik. You are my son. You, Jalen, and Tasha. That's never going to change." Malik's eyes welled with tears, but he blinked them away. James pulled him into a hug. For the first time, Malik didn't resist. That night, when they got home, James sat with all three kids at the dinner table. "No matter what anyone says, we are a family. And families stand together." It was in that moment that Malik, Jalen, and Tasha truly believed it. What James didn't know was that 10 years later, they would return the favor in a way that would change his life forever. The cost of sacrifice. The years passed like pages turning in an old book, each chapter filled with struggles, triumphs, and moments that tested James Calloway in ways he never expected. Raising three children who carried the weight of their past on their small shoulders wasn't just about providing food, shelter, and discipline. It was about fighting for them when no one else would. It was about giving them love so deep it could silence the voices that told them they weren't enough. James never married again after Lisa passed, never had biological children of his own. He never imagined he would become a father at all. But now, when he looked at Malik, Jalen, and Tasha, he couldn't see life any other way. Still, life had a way of making sure he never got too comfortable. The diner's struggles. The diner had been struggling for a long time. But James never let the kids see how bad it had gotten. He worked longer hours, cut back on his own meals, and turned off the heat at night just to keep the lights on. But small-town gossip spread faster than wildfire, and customers weren't as willing to sit in his booths anymore. Some avoided the place because they didn't like what James had done, taking in 3 black kids and calling them his own. Others simply saw a struggling business and figured it was only a matter of time before the doors closed for good. James refused to give up, though. He built this diner with his own hands, alongside Lisa. It was her dream as much as it was his, and every time he considered shutting it down, he remembered the way she'd laughed while painting the sign above the door. Calloway's Diner, a place for family. Family, James muttered to himself one night as he stared at the dwindling numbers in his accounting ledger. The irony wasn't lost on him. That same night, after he thought the kids were asleep, he sat in the dim light of the kitchen, his head in his hands. "Dad." James looked up to see Jalen standing in the doorway. He was older now, his once quiet and timid nature replaced with a quiet strength. James forced a smile. "What are you doing up, son?" Jalen hesitated before stepping into the room. "I heard you on the phone. About the diner." James sighed. "Didn't mean for you to hear that." Jalen sat across from him. "Are we in trouble?" James considered lying, but he knew his son was too smart for that. "It's been rough," he admitted. "I'm doing everything I can, but I don't know how much longer we can keep this place going." Jalen was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe we can help." James chuckled, shaking his head. "You kids have school to worry about. That's your job." But Jalen wasn't convinced. "We're not kids anymore, Dad. Maybe it's time you let us help you for once." James wanted to argue, to insist that it wasn't their burden to carry. But looking at Jalen's face, at the determination in his eyes, James realized something. He wasn't just raising children anymore. He was raising young men and women who wanted to stand beside him, not behind him. An unexpected betrayal. Not long after that conversation, James walked into the diner one morning to find something that made his stomach drop. The sign that had hung above the door for over a decade had been defaced. The word family had been crossed out in red paint, and in its place, someone had scrawled a hateful message. Know your place. James stood frozen, his fists clenching at his sides. He should have expected this. The town had never fully accepted his family. He dealt with whispers, judgment, and lost customers. But this was different. This was a message meant to cut deeper. Anger burned in his chest, but before he could react, he heard a voice behind him. Dad. He turned to see Malik standing there, his eyes dark with fury. James quickly moved to block the view. Go inside, son. But Malik had already seen it. Who did this? His voice was sharp, his hands clenched into fists. I don't know, James admitted. And it doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't, Malik shot back. They think they can do this and get away with it. James placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Listen to me. This isn't how we handle things. Malik shook his head. And how do we handle it, Dad? Just ignore it. Let them keep walking all over us. James exhaled. We show them we're better than this. We clean it up. We keep going. We don't give them the satisfaction of knowing they got to us. Malik's jaw tightened, but after a long moment he nodded. Together, they scrubbed the hateful words away. But James knew the scars they left behind weren't so easy to erase. A town that wouldn't forget. In the weeks that followed, James noticed things getting worse. People who once smiled at him now avoided eye contact. Some of the diner's regulars stopped coming altogether. The bills kept piling up. One afternoon, as he was wiping down tables, an older man named Frank Simmons, a longtime customer, walked in. Frank had always been decent to James, not overly friendly, but respectful. That day, however, something was different. He sat at the counter, but he didn't order anything. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice low. James, I think it's time you started thinking about moving on. James stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? Frank sighed. I mean, people around here, they don't forget things. They don't like change. And you brought change they weren't ready for. James stared at him. I didn't ask for their permission. Frank nodded. I know. And that's why they're making it hard for you. He hesitated. I heard the bank's looking to foreclose on your place. If you don't sell first, you won't have a choice. James felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. You saying they're trying to push me out? Frank didn't answer, but his silence said everything. James clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to let these people decide his family's fate, a family that wouldn't break. That night, after the kids got home, James sat them down. He told them everything. The vandalism, the lost customers, the bank. Tasha's eyes filled with tears. But this is our home, she whispered. James swallowed hard. I know, sweetheart. Malik was furious. They think they can just run us out. Jalen was quiet for a long time before he finally said, We won't let them. James looked at him. I don't know if we have a choice, son. But Jalen just shook his head. You gave up everything for us. It's our turn now. James didn't understand what he meant at the time, but he would soon. Because his children, his 3 beautiful, resilient, powerful children, were about to change his life in ways he never saw coming. And when they did, the town that tried to break them would be forced to watch as they rose higher than anyone ever expected. The unbreakable bond. The night after their conversation, James Calloway lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a battlefield of worries. About the diner, the kids, the town, and the future that suddenly felt so uncertain. He had fought against a world that never wanted to see his family thrive. But now, as the weight of it all bore down on him, he couldn't help but wonder if it was time to admit defeat. Then, just as exhaustion finally started to pull him under, he heard something. Soft voices murmuring from the living room. James sat up, rubbing his tired eyes. He didn't usually eavesdrop, but there was something about the hushed urgency in their voices that made him pause. Quietly, he swung his legs over the bed, grabbed his robe, and moved toward the door. As he neared the hallway, he recognized the voices: Malik, Jalen, and Tasha. "We have to do something," Malik was saying, his tone fierce. "He's done everything for us, and now they're trying to take it all away." "I know," Jalen replied, his voice calmer but just as determined. "But what can we do? We don't have money." Tasha spoke up, her voice softer but no less firm. "We don't need money. We just need to be smart." James felt a lump form in his throat. His kids weren't just angry, they were planning something. A plan in motion. The next morning, James walked into the kitchen, expecting to find his kids at the table, but they were already gone. He frowned. It wasn't like them to leave without saying goodbye. Then he saw the note on the counter. "Dad, trust us. We've got this." James stared at the words for a long time. A part of him wanted to go find them, to demand they tell him what they were up to. But another part, the part that had watched them grow into strong, capable young adults, told him to let them try. So he did. For the next few days, James noticed little changes. The kids were always out, coming home late, talking in hushed tones. He had no idea what they were up to, but there was something in the way they carried themselves, something almost hopeful. Then, one afternoon, everything became clear. A town forced to listen. James was at the diner, wiping down the counter, when he heard the bell above the door chime. He looked up, expecting the usual empty tables and indifferent stares from the few remaining customers. Instead, he saw something that made his heart stop. The diner was packed. People were everywhere, filling the booths, the counter seats, even standing along the walls. And more were coming in. James blinked in shock. What in the world? Then he saw them, his kids, standing near the entrance. Jalen stepped forward first, smiling wide. "Surprise, Dad." James turned in confusion. What is this?" Tasha grinned. "We fixed it." Before James could even process her words, a voice called out from the crowd. "Mr. Calloway, over here." James turned and saw a young woman holding a camera. Next to her was a man with a microphone. "A local news crew. We heard about everything you've done," the reporter said. "Your kids told us your story." James looked at his children in shock. "You? What?" Jalen stepped forward. "We couldn't let them run us out, Dad. So we told the world who you are, what you've done for us, how you saved us." James felt his breath catch in his throat. Tasha continued, her voice thick with emotion. "We put our story online. People started sharing it. And before we knew it, people started listening." James looked around the diner again. It wasn't just locals filling the seats. It was people from out of town. People who had come just to support him. The reporter smiled. "Mr. Calloway, I think you're about to see just how much of a difference one man can make. A community rebuilt." For the first time in years, Calloway's diner was alive again. The story of the man who adopted 3 black kids despite the odds, who fought to give them a life in a town that never wanted them, spread like wildfire. Donations started pouring in. Customers lined up around the block, and people who had once turned their backs on him now looked at him with something close to admiration. James could hardly believe it. Later that night, after the last customer had left and the diner was finally quiet, James stood with his kids, staring at the full cash register. "You really did this," he murmured, shaking his head. "I don't even know what to say." Malik grinned. "You don't have to say anything, Dad. You raised us to fight for what's right. This was just our way of fighting for you." James swallowed hard. He had spent years protecting them, shielding them from the world's cruelty. And now, they had done the same for him. A lump formed in his throat as he pulled them into a hug. "Thank you," he whispered, and for the first time in a long time, James Calloway felt something he thought he had lost. Hope. The price of change. The morning after the diner's miraculous turnaround, James Calloway stood outside his restaurant, gazing at the bustling street. For the first time in years, the sidewalks were crowded, not with judgmental stares or quiet whispers, but with customers eager to support him. Cars lined the curb, and people filled the booths inside, ordering food faster than James and his small staff could serve them. The energy was electric. Laughter, conversation, and the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. James exhaled slowly. His kids had done this. They had taken the weight of his burdens, carried them on their shoulders, and found a way to turn it all around. He had spent so much of his life believing that he had to fight alone. Yet here they were, proving him wrong. But as the sun climbed higher, so did the tension in town. Not everyone was thrilled about his sudden success. The resistance. It started with something small. The first sign of trouble was a phone call. James had just finished refilling a customer's coffee when the phone behind the counter rang. He wiped his hands on a rag and picked up. Calloway's Diner. There was a brief silence on the other end before a slow, familiar voice spoke. "You really think this changes anything?" James stiffened. He recognized the voice instantly. Harlan Davis, one of the wealthiest men in town. A man who had always been quietly opposed to James adopting his kids, who had subtly discouraged the townspeople from supporting his business. "This town remembers Calloway," Harlan continued. "They don't forget." James clenched his jaw. "Forget what, exactly?" Another pause. Then, in a low, cold tone, Harlan said, "That you don't belong." Click. James stood there, gripping the phone long after the line went dead. A slow rage boiled in his chest. Harlan Davis had always been one of the town's unofficial gatekeepers, the kind of man who never had to say his racism outright. He let his power and influence do the talking. James had dealt with men like him all his life. But this time, something was different. This time, James wasn't alone. The threats begin. That night, as James locked up the diner, he noticed something strange. A piece of paper was taped to the glass door. He peeled it off and read the words written in thick, uneven letters. "Leave he." His stomach twisted. He turned, scanning the empty street. A single streetlight flickered, casting long shadows. James exhaled sharply. He wasn't afraid. Not for himself, but for his kids. That was another story. The threats escalated over the next few days. A brick was thrown through the diner's window, shattering the glass and leaving behind another note. "This isn't your home." James's anger burned, but he kept his cool. He had faced worse. But when his kids found out, they weren't nearly as calm. "We can't just let this happen." Malik fumed, pacing the living room. Tasha crossed her arms, her jaw clenched. "They're trying to scare us. They think we'll just walk away," Jalen added. James sat in his recliner, rubbing his temples. He had spent years teaching his kids to stand tall, to never let fear dictate their actions. But now, for the first time, he wondered if fighting back would only make things worse. "What do you want us to do, Dad?" Malik asked. "Just sit here and take it." James sighed. "No, son. But we need to be smart. We don't fight hate with more hate." Malik's hands balled into fists, but he nodded. "Then we show them we're not going anywhere." The rally. The next morning, James arrived at the diner to find something unexpected. People were gathered outside. Not just customers, but reporters, activists, even members of the black community from nearby towns who had heard about what was happening. They held signs that read, "Calloway's Diner stays. Hate won't win. We support James." James stared, stunned. Then he spotted his kids at the front of the crowd. Jalen held a megaphone. "This isn't just about a diner," he said, his voice echoing down the street. "This is about a man who took in 3 kids when no one else would. A man who gave everything to a town that tried to push him out. And now, They want to take his home, his business, his life. We won't let it happen." A roar of agreement rose from the crowd. James's throat tightened. His kids weren't just fighting for him. They were fighting for everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed. And for the first time, James saw it. Not just the love they had for him, but the strength he had given them. The town's response. Not everyone was happy about the rally. The next day, a group of town officials, led by Harlan Davis, arrived at the diner. "Calloway," Harlan sneered, stepping inside. "You've caused quite a stir." James wiped his hands on his apron and leaned against the counter. "Seems that way." Harlan smirked. "This little protest of yours, it won't last. The town will move on. And when they do, you'll be right back where you started." James studied him for a long moment. Then, in a calm, steady voice, he said, "You're wrong." Harlan's smirk faded. James gestured toward the full booths, the people enjoying their meals, the laughter that filled the air. "You see that?" he said. "That's not just customers. That's a community. A real one. And you don't get to decide who belongs anymore." Harlan's face darkened. He leaned in slightly. "We'll see about that." Then he turned and walked out. James exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, he knew, with certainty, that he wasn't fighting alone. The unbreakable bond. The threats didn't stop. If anything, after the rally, they grew worse. Someone slashed the tires on James Calloway's truck. A customer reported seeing suspicious figures lingering near the diner late at night. Anonymous calls came in, some warning him to leave town, others spewing hatred he had heard before, but never let break him. James had expected it. But what he hadn't expected was the overwhelming support that followed. A town divided. It wasn't just his family fighting back anymore. The day after the rally, a group of local business owners, some black, some white, stood outside the diner in solidarity. They drank coffee at the counter, left bigger tips than usual, and made it clear that they weren't going anywhere either. "We're with you, James," said Carla, the owner of a small flower shop down the street. "They can try to scare you, but they won't scare all of us." James nodded, grateful but uneasy. Harlan Davis and his followers weren't the kind to let things go. They had held power in this town for too long, and now that grip was slipping. James knew men like Harlan didn't just give up. A reckoning in the dark. The attack came late at night. James was inside the diner alone, going through the books, when he heard a noise. A creak. Then another. His heartbeat quickened. James reached for the baseball bat he kept behind the counter and moved cautiously toward the front door. Before he could react, the window beside him shattered. Glass rained down, and James instinctively ducked. His breath came fast, adrenaline surging. Outside, figures moved in the darkness, at least 3 of them. Shadows shifting, voices murmuring. James wasn't a fool. He knew better than to charge into a fight alone. Instead, he did the one thing they hadn't expected. He turned on the outside floodlights. Bright white beams lit up the parking lot, exposing the intruders. 3 men in dark hoodies froze, caught like deer in headlights. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, James recognized immediately. Harlan's son, Caleb. For a long second, neither side moved. Then, footsteps pounded against the pavement. James turned to see Malik, Jalen, and Tasha sprinting down the sidewalk, followed by a crowd of neighbors, customers, and friends. They had been watching. They had been ready. The intruders panicked. Caleb took off running, the other 2 stumbling after him. But they didn't get far. A group of men blocked the alleyway ahead. Some black, some white, some old, some young, but all of them united. One of them stepped forward. Sheriff Reynolds. His uniform was crisp, his badge glinting under the floodlights. His arms crossed over his chest as he stared down the men who had terrorized the Calloway family for too long. "Where do you boys think you're going?" The tables turn. By the next morning, the entire town knew. Harlan Davis's son had been caught vandalizing the diner. The sheriff pressed charges. Caleb and his accomplices were taken into custody, and for the first time, Harlan's name didn't carry enough weight to make it all disappear. The diner was repaired by volunteers who refused to let hate win. The broken glass was replaced, the graffiti scrubbed away. Within 24 hours, Calloway's diner was back in business. But the biggest shift wasn't in the diner, it was in the town itself. More people started speaking up. The ones who had always secretly supported James, but had been too afraid to take a stand. They came forward, rejecting the old power structure. Harlan lost his influence. James gained something far greater. Not just respect, not just a thriving business, but a town that finally, truly accepted him and his family. The final surprise. A week after the attack, James sat outside on the diner's porch, sipping coffee. The air was warm, the sky streaked with soft oranges and purples. His kids joined him, pulling up chairs, their expressions unreadable. "Dad," Malik said slowly, "there's something we haven't told you yet." James raised an eyebrow. "Another surprise? You three are gonna give me a heart attack." They chuckled but quickly grew serious. Jalen leaned forward. "We bought something." James frowned. "Bought what?" Tasha slid an envelope across the table. "Open it." James hesitated, then unfolded the papers inside. His eyes scanned the words, his hands trembling slightly. "Deed of ownership, Calloway's Diner." His heart stopped. "You?" His voice faltered. He looked up at them. "You bought the diner." Malik grinned. "Not just bought it, Dad. Paid it off. No more debts. No more stress. It's ours. Yours. Free and clear." James blinked hard, his vision blurring. He had spent 10 years giving them a future, and now they had given him one. His throat was tight. He didn't trust his voice, so he reached out instead, pulling all three of them into a rough, tearful embrace. No words were needed, because in that moment, James Calloway realized something. He had set out to save 3 kids, but in the end, they had saved him right back.